What we're going to do now is discuss the plot of a story, the storyline. But we're going to be a little more specific. We're going to discuss actual plot structure. And the best way of illustrating it is if we make a triangle, a scalene triangle, not isosceles, because the plot structure can change radically, but it always has certain elements. We begin with something called exposition, right over here. Exposition would be the introduction, perhaps where the setting is established, where we first meet a character, just laying out the foundations of the story. That eventually changes with the introduction of a person, an incident, a thing causing conflict. So this is introduction here. Right over here would be conflict. If the conflict grows, it becomes complication. If the complication intensifies to a point of no return, that's called crisis. We have a lot of C's here, but you'll just have to bear with it. Crisis is point of no return. Finally, as the crisis builds to a climax, which would involve certain actions, certain statements to be made that are going to alter the whole story, or at least alter the outcome of the story, that point of highest tension is called climax. Now, from exposition to climax, we call that rising action. If this is the end, which we call resolution, the point from the climax to the resolution, also known as this area here, denouement, D-E-N-O-U-E-M-E-N-T, everything between climax and resolution is denouement, would be, in a broader sense, falling action. So practically every story, you could make a triangle for it of rising action and falling action. And sometimes some of the phases are integrated together. There's a famous story, I made reference to this before, John Updike's A&P. The conflict begins in the first sentence, where you have a number of girls, teenage girls in bathing suits, suddenly coming into an A&P that is 5.5 miles from the beach. That would be the conflict, and then it grows throughout the story. However, throughout, conflict, complication, there's a lot of expository material being provided by the narrator. The narrator happens to be the protagonist, the main character in the story. And he's telling the story. In the story, he gets more and more involved in watching these young ladies to the detriment of what he has to do in his job. And as the conflict builds, there's a complication when he runs up a fee or a price for a customer twice. And then we reach a crisis. Finally, as the women, young ladies are about to leave, because of their inappropriate attire, the manager of the story, called Mr. Lengel, drops by to chastise them, and they say, and he says to them, look, next time you come here, you should be dressed appropriately. And he says other things to them about, you know, how they should act, how they should dress, etc., etc. And they seem to be slightly offended. At this point, Sammy, so this is the crisis when Lengel occurs and puts down the young ladies. The climax occurs when Sammy, in their defense, says, I'm going to quit. Lengel gives him a chance to back down. What did you say again? Sammy says, I'm going to quit. And he very ceremoniously removes his cashier's uniform, bow tie, and an apron, slams it down on the counter, and walks out the door. Now, right before he walks out the door, the girls have just left. This is the climax when he has the confrontation with his boss. He gets out the store, and the first thing he does is look for the girls. They're nowhere in sight. They drove off in their convertible, let's say, heading back to the beach, which means this great gesture he made of defending their honor by quitting was totally ignored by them, even if they noticed it. He then turns back, looking at the store. He sees Mr. Lengel with his own uniform on, Sammy's uniform, the bow tie, the apron, and the look on Mr. Lengel's face is not one of pleasure or pleasantness. At that time, Sammy goes through what we call a rite of passage, a characterization term, which means a change. And he goes from being a very immature 19-year-old kid to a 19-year-old young adult, a young man. Because he realizes that from this point on, his life will become much more difficult, more complicated. So that's how we use plot structure there. There are other stories where you have extensive exposition phase. But we'll get to examples such as that at some other time, probably when we discuss point of view. Well, thank you for your time.